Hello! I'm going to make this one quick, hopefully. I'm really tired. I want to relax. I want to go back and carry on decorating my Conan Exiles lawn house. But I had a thought. I say I had a thought. A mountain madman came into my comments and had a thought, and now I've stolen that thought and expanded upon it. You see, in Godzilla X Kong, well, in the trailer for Godzilla X... No, it wasn't the trailer. It was a news report for Godzilla X Kong. Someone said it. Someone said that in Godzilla X Kong, there's going to be an 8-minute section of the film where there are no human characters on screen or involved. It's just going to be purely Titans. People then took that and ran with it and said it was going to be an 8-minute fight scene, which is not what the actual article, news report, whatever the hell it was, said. But the message was there's going to be sections of Godzilla X Kong where it's just Titans, no humans involved. Now my question is, why would somebody announce that? Why would somebody tell the public that parts of their film aren't going to include human characters in it? And if you're a long-time Godzilla or Kaiju fan, you'll probably know exactly what the answer is. People have been clamouring, shouting, requesting, any other adjective you can think of, for a giant monster film without any humans in it. This is under the belief that when people go to see giant monster films, they want to see the giant monsters, which does make sense. Because, yeah, I mean, you go to watch giant monsters, you see the name Godzilla on the screen, you go and watch it for Godzilla. So then it's a reasonable, it's a reasonable extrapolation that people want to go and see the giant monsters in the giant monster films. So therefore, if the film was entirely giant monsters, people would like them more. So the less that the people are involved with it, the more the monsters are involved with it, the more likeable the film would be. Now in some cases, that would be true. Godzilla vs. Kong, for example, was an absolute nonsense mess of a film, and it wasn't helped by the nonsense mess of the human cast's story in the film. I mean, the entire podcast crew's storyline was just nonsense and immaterial and did nothing for the film. I don't even know why that was in there. Anyway, one of these days, if I get time, which I won't, so I'm just going to say it here, one of these days I would love to rewrite Godzilla vs. Kong without the human cast, because it would be really easy. You could have a story of Godzilla vs. Kong and have human elements in it, like there'd be, in my version, there would be like visitors to Skull Island, and there'd be like ferries that Kong would throw stuff at because he doesn't want them coming along, and then, you know, that sort of thing. There'd be human elements in, but not actual human characters that would get involved in the plot. So, the idea of a kaiju-only film is entirely reasonable. You just have to have the proper story for it. Because, as I've said in previous videos, people struggle with even normal storylines, including people that are spoken and have been explained. They struggle to understand everything. So they're making a film where you've got these giant non-humanoid creatures that aren't talking. It's going to be a struggle to get people to understand what the hell is going on. It can be done, but it'll be a struggle. And with some of the writing that I've seen in modern films lately, big budget films, I'm not 100% sure they'd be able to carry it through. But even if you had really good writers who could transpose a completely voiceless script onto a giant monster film, even if you could do it, is it a good idea? Is it worth doing? Especially when the highest rated, the most liked, the most lauded over of the giant monster films, the Godzilla films, are the ones which are rather, like, heavily human focused. Most people would talk about Godzilla, the original one from 1954, that is very heavily human focused. I would say Godzilla Killing the Monsters, that's quite heavily human focused. I know other people will say no, it's not very good. I say it is. I've got a 2-hour video going over why I think it is. I could probably do more nowadays. I'll probably make a 1,000,000-hour video at this rate. And now, with Godzilla Minus One, you can now add that film to the pile of the best Godzilla films, which are, in fact, human-focused. So really, Godzilla Minus One proves my point that the best monster films are human-focused. But then this leads me on to something that I said in my video that I released Saturday. In my Godzilla Minus One video, I mentioned that the story of the film was good enough that if it didn't have Godzilla in it, if Godzilla was removed from the story and all the elements surrounding him were replaced with something else, the story would still be a great story, worthy of going to see in the cinema and praising. Then along comes this mountain madman who says, if the story is that good, then why is Godzilla in it? And that is a good question. People who advocate for kaiju only films don't really consider the idea of the kaiju films having a good story, they just want a film with only kaiju in. But if you made a good story for the kaiju, then it would be a good film that people could talk about, and maybe it might be praised as much as Godzilla Minus One. Probably not, but you never know. And arguably, if the story in a Godzilla film is good enough, then you could transpose that story from a Godzilla film into its own film and make it a good film, which with Godzilla Minus One you can absolutely do. You could have a story about a cowardly kamikaze pilot who survives the war and then has post-war guilt as he sees the effect of Japan who lost a war and all its people are now suffering. A pilot who is blamed for the loss of the war, for the suffering of the Japanese people, even though he absolutely has no reason to feel guilty about that. Obviously, in the film they use Godzilla as an embodiment of this guilt, as a more relatable, more understandable version of that guilt for people who did not experience what he experienced. Which is interesting because in the film there's a bit where they say, you should be proud of not having seen war. Which, yeah, we should. It means our society is working properly. Cough, Russia. So the idea that the film would have to transpose the feelings of a war into a monster so that people who haven't been to war can understand what the feelings are like. Interesting. But if you took away Godzilla and took any parts that Godzilla had a major effect in, like, spoilers, the character wanting to kill himself for the betterment of the people of Japan by basically kamikazing into Godzilla and killing him, you would have to replace that with something else. Or maybe you wouldn't, and you would have certain plot points like, again, spoilers, his girlfriend slash roommate dying or presumably dying, and then he feels even more guilt about that and he starts thinking about killing himself. Actually, that would quite work, because the whole idea of the Japanese soldiers killing themselves rather than letting themselves be captured or lose in a battle, dying in battle or killing themselves, you can have that coming forth in the story as he starts to think about killing himself whilst also having this child to look after. You see what I mean? This story could be really good on its own. It could be fascinating and interesting, and yeah, it will be one of those films that people might claim is Oscar bait or something like that because of the depth and intricacies of the characters going on. You could have made a story called Minus One, referring to the fact that Japan lost the war and then the guy came back from war and then was treated like shit, so he was at 0 and then reduced from 0 to -1 by the effects post-war, not only of his psyche and his mental trauma, but also of the people around him, the way they treat him because of what they know he's like. And then maybe as the film goes on, he tries to hide it, and people find out, and yeah. See? Great story, lots to develop from it. So the question is, should Godzilla have been in -1? Should Godzilla -1 minus Godzilla? Now, whilst the story could absolutely stand on its own feet, whilst the story has plenty of legs under it to carry it forward into the cinematic grounds, greens, playing fields, whatever, would it have been as successful on its own? Now, that is a good question. Most people who have been on the internet for any amount of time will probably have heard about the controversies surrounding Joker. Joker was a small budget film by comparison. I think it was 50 million? Yeah, 50 million budget I think it was. Which is tiny in comparison to literally everything else. A $50 million budget for Joker was considered a small budget, and yet it made its money back times and times and times over because it was so successful. But would it have been as successful if it didn't have the title of Joker and the association with DC? Which again is a very good question. Because the character of Arthur Fleck, the DC connections in that film are very, very limited. The two major ones are the fact that the character is the persona that Arthur Fleck takes up at the end of the film is called Joker. And indeed, all you'd have to do then is change the name of... It's not Bruce Wayne, is it? It's his dad. Batman's dad. If you change the name of the Wayne family to something else, once you've done those two things, hey presto, it's no longer a DC related film. And then the film's title would be Clown. Well, actually, you could just call it Joker, I suppose, and people might think it's DC related, and they go and watch it and go, hang on a minute, there's nothing to do with DC in this. But if you called it Clown, and just said it was a character examination of this man with mental issues as his life spirals out of control. If you released that film like that, would it have been as successful? Would it have been as widespread? And in my mind, I don't think so. When you look at films like The Whale, with Brendan Fraser, that film was a very good film. I managed to eventually watch it on Amazon Prime. I say eventually watch it because I don't remember ever seeing it advertised in the cinema. The Whale was barely advertised, was barely promoted outside of those niche sectors. And I only got to see it a long time after all of that had happened, just on the off chance on a streaming service. Compare that to Joker, who had a full cinematic release, and everybody went to the cinema to see it, and it made loads and loads of money, etc, etc. That made so much more of an impact because of the association with the DC universe. Which leads us all the way back to Godzilla Minus One, because if you took Godzilla out of -1 and the film was just -1, it would have been an interesting name. It would have got people wondering what it was about. People might have gone and seen it because of that, but I don't think it would have had anywhere near the reach or the impact it would have had without the Godzilla name on it. Godzilla -1 also had the advantage of the writer's strike, which affected a lot of films that should have been coming out around about this time. Those would have been big budget films, mostly Disney stuff I would imagine, because Disney does a lot of stuff nowadays. I mean, most people will probably know about the fact that when Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness came out, that just filled cinemas to the point where there were no spare screenings for other films. So when people say, oh, what films did you go and see, most of them are talking about Marvel or anything Disney related, because Disney just takes up everything. But then thanks to the writer's strike, a lot of films just didn't happen, so all those spaces were open for other films to come in. Hence, Godzilla Minus One got a full theatrical release, where potentially it might not have. Now take the name Godzilla out of the title and try to imagine that minus one, a focused character study of an ex-kamikaze pilot in 1947, being released at around the time when a lot of films should have been there but weren't. Imagine that film coming out, and do you think it would have got the full cinematic release that Godzilla Minus One did? I don't think it would have. I think it would have suffered the same fate as The Whale. It might have got a lot of praise from people outside of the mainstream, like all these film festivals and whatnot. And it might have got some awards, it might have got, you know, the same thing that The Whale had. But it also would have suffered the same way that The Whale did, by being reduced to streaming services long after its supposed theatrical release. By comparison, Godzilla Minus One advertised absolutely everywhere. The fan base absolutely, just everybody was talking about it. And like I said in my video, it's bizarre to have seen a cinema full of people clapping at the end of the film. And my thought behind that is that, yeah, it was a Godzilla film. It was the first time a Godzilla film's been released in the cinemas, over here especially in the UK, for years and years and years. But then also, it was a really good film with a great story behind it that could have stood on its own but had Godzilla in it. I think that might have surprised a lot of people who just went there to see a Godzilla film. Going back to the question, should Godzilla Minus One minus Godzilla? And the answer is yes and no. Yes, because the story is good enough that it could have stood on its own and made a very good story that a lot of people would have liked and would have got a lot of praise. But also no, because it would not have got the amount of reach, the amount of advertisement and support. It wouldn't have had people talking about it anywhere as near as much. So that's where we're going to have to leave it, unfortunately, with the fact that it's a negative and positive thing, that it could have been good on its own, but needed Godzilla to get it into the public eye. But on the plus side, we now have in the public eye a Godzilla film that is very, very good, and maybe has boosted the reputation of the Godzilla franchise and other giant monster films along with it. And also, just to keep flogging that dead horse a bit, it also shows that the best giant monster films, the best kaiju films, the best Godzilla films are the ones which are heavily human focused and have great writing and great human drama in. From Godzilla 1954 to Godzilla Minus One, and in my opinion, the best one, Godzilla King of the Monsters. And on that note, I'm going to say goodbye and thank you for watching.